So we're going to talk some technical stuff tonight, but then we're also going to have some fun. And I'm going to take you through the entire process. So there will be a lot to cover. Definitely the recording is going to be worthwhile for this presentation. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm actually going to start with some Keynote stuff. So let's go right into Keynote. So here's what we're here for. And gee, you would think this would be something that would be simple and easy we could all follow, but unfortunately, it's not. That said, there are concrete, definitive things you can do, rules, steps you can follow that will get you great prints both from your desktop printer and from sending out to the lab. And we're going to cover all the pieces and all the places in Photoshop and Lightroom where you need to know how to work around them. So let's first talk about what the problems are. Because if you think about it, from the time you capture an image with your camera to print, there's a whole lot of stuff lost because you've got this perfect full spectrum of visual light thing on your camera, but then it goes through all these devices that don't have that kind of color depth in them. So what are the kinds of things that happen? We're going to start with the biggest source of the problems, and then we're going to go through them step by step. Now, hopefully you're dealing with raw files. Now, if you're dealing with, now, do you have to do raw? No. In fact, I'm going to do an image adjustment on a JPEG just to show you that you can do it. The benefit, however, with your raw files is you've got a lot more tonal range, you've got a lot more color depth. So if you need to do an edit that's maybe a little more extreme with a lot of dark shadows and bright highlights, the JPEGs are going to really resist being fixed from those problems. If the exposure is pretty good on the JPEG, you're fine. But when you have something really high contrasty, then it's going to be a problem. So we're going to start with raw files and understand that the first thing that happens is causing problems. You bring a raw file into your software, and that raw file has to be converted into something that can be sent to the screen. Right there, lots of bad things happen. But the first thing is your screen. So we're going to start, that's the most important thing. You've got to make sure your screen is accurate because think about it. All of your editing that you're doing, every time you go into Lightroom or Photoshop and make some kind of adjustment, you're basing that adjustment on what you're seeing on your screen. And if your screen's not correct, then all your adjustments are pure guesswork. Now, fortunately, lately, screens have gotten better, but there's also the color spaces have changed. Just a quick raise of hands. How many of you guys are working on Mac monitors, on Macintosh computers? All right. If you've got a Mac monitor or a Mac laptop, those, and it's a relatively new one, all of the Mac monitors now work in something called P3. Now, for years, we knew about sRGB and Adobe RGB and ProPhoto RGB, and then all of a sudden there's this P3 thing. What the heck is it? In fact, let's get this over with because I'm going to show you this. There's a utility on the Mac called ColorSync that, again, it's kind of technically stuff, but it shows you some interesting things. So, for example, if I pick
Hello.
up, somebody's talking. Yes. Okay. Now they're muted. If you see the Adobe RGB space, well, there it is. Well, that really doesn't tell you a lot other than the bot. This is black, this is white, and this is the range of colors that Adobe RGB can address. So if I hold this, because seeing it by itself doesn't tell us anything, we need to compare it to something else. So, for example, if we bring up sRGB and rotate this around, you can see Adobe RGB is now the ghosted one in white, how much bigger the Adobe RGB color space is compared to sRGB. Now, if you don't have a Mac P3 monitor or a monitor that is specifically Adobe RGB, and if you have one, you'll know it because you paid more for it. You are only seeing sRGB. Now, P3 is a new one. Apple started it a couple of years ago. What is it? It's a version of Adobe RGB that is shifted slightly to better accommodate video because everybody's depending on video for everything. So here's P3 inside Adobe RGB. Now you can see in some places, like down here, the purples, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, P3 is bigger than Adobe RGB. However, if we spin it around and you look at all the greens, they're all missing because the entire thing has been shifted over. Technically, Adobe RGB is still a slightly larger space, but P3 is pretty close, but in a different way. So you can see it can show you a bunch of colors that Adobe RGB can't, but the same thing for Adobe RGB. So that's what P3 is. Now, if you don't have a P3 monitor or you don't have an Adobe RGB monitor, then you are dealing with sRGB. Now, the big problem is that your cameras are capturing in the visible light spectrum, which is really ProPhoto RGB. Do I even have a ProPhoto RGB in here? Let's see. Yes, I do. Here's ProPhoto RGB. So if I hold that, ProPhoto RGB is basically the entire visible light spectrum. So if I put sRGB in there, let's go ahead and throw sRGB inside. There you get to see that white thing is what your camera is capturing, and it's the color space that Lightroom is working in. That little thing on the inside is the only pieces of it that your monitor can show you unless you have an Adobe RGB monitor or a P3 monitor. Even that said, though, if we put Adobe RGB in there, still look how much smaller it is compared to what your camera is capturing. So these are the things we're going to have to deal with as we go through our edit because our cameras are capturing this white stuff, all the colors out in here, yet Adobe RGB is only that and sRGB is only that. So I think you can see right now, here's the first problem. What are we going to do with all the data in our images that's out here? Now, it isn't always out here. These are going to be more super saturated and more extreme colors, but they do show up. And it depends where you want to output them. That's going to decide what you can actually see. So don't be depressed. There's still ways around that. In fact, the fact that we've been all having prints done on Photolab printers for as long as we can remember, guess what? Photolab printers work in sRGB. So, and we've been fine with that. So let's talk about your monitor because there's three places where this whole color calibration and profiling thing comes into play. One is your monitor. Two is your camera, how your camera is capturing color. And three is when you're going out to print with a paper profile. The most important of those three is your monitor. So let's take a look and see why. Well, it's just like I said earlier, it's really obvious why it's so important because this is where you're making your editing decisions based on what you see on the screen. And if it's not correct, then you're just guessing. Now, here's the weird thing. If you're working in a closed system, it's just you and your monitor and your printer, and you know that when you make it look a certain way on the screen, and then when you send it out to your printer, you boost the saturation and make it a little redder, that works. Well, that's fine. You can just shoot from the hip like that for a while. The problems start to really happen when you send the image out either to social media or to have a print done not on your closed loop system. And a couple of common things that happen with a monitor is because of the preponderance of people getting their information through video. Blues make white look better on videos. It makes it look cleaner. So a lot of monitors come out of the box towards the blue side. Well, what happens is, all right, you've got an image on your screen. It looks too blue. It's not the data in the file, it's the actual way the monitor is showing you the data. The image might be fine, but what you do is you go into software and you try to fix it, to fix how it looks on the monitor. So you add blue, you had to add yellow, which is the opposite of blue. Now it looks great on the screen. The problem is the image didn't need yellow. It was the monitor that was making it blue, not the way the data was. So what ends up happening is you end up with a yellow print because you added yellow to something that was already fine, but you couldn't tell because of how your monitor was set up. The other part is brightness. Most monitors are way too bright coming out of the box. There are values for it. Kind of the high value for brightness that you should shoot for is 100. It's called 100. It's 120. It's candelas per meter squared. And you also hear nits now. I don't know where they came up with that. Oh, Diane's pointing at me. Here she has a question. Yes. Beano's. Benro. Okay, she's shaking her head. Yes, Benrose. I don't know. It depends on the monitor. Everybody makes monitors all over the place. Apple has standardized on P3, but that would be a thing. Look up at the specs, and it'll say if it's percentage of sRGB or Adobe RGB or P3. It will tell you that. So the number you should shoot for is, if you can, nothing higher than 120. Again, candelas per meter squared. Most of the times they leave that off. The reason for that is 120 is a good compromise to be able to show you accurate values for highlights and shadows. If you go brighter than that, you're unnaturally lightening anything you see on the screen. Again, it might look good for video, not good for photography and prints. In fact, if you had ever walked into, say, an advertising agency, I've done work in New York City with some advertising agencies, their editing rooms, the brightness in those rooms is like candlelight. They're very down, and most of their monitors are set around 80, which would be pretty dim in a brightly lit room. But you want to make sure when you're doing your editing that the monitor is the brightest thing that you're looking at. So what ends up happening is the same thing. When you have a monitor that's too bright, what do? It looks good on the screen, and maybe it's too bright. So, all right, let me turn it down a little bit. That's a little too bright. But again, it's the monitor that's making the image look bright, not the data in the image. And you end up getting dark prints because your monitor was too bright. And this is probably the most common complaint I've heard when people send out for prints. They come back too dark. The problem is your monitor's set too bright. So you need hardware to calibrate your monitor. There's no way around it. I don't have any special offer for you or anything, but I've started using this thing. In fact, I've got one right here. Here it is. That's that thing on the left side of the Display 123. The thing that's nice about this, it is really plug and play. You plug it into a USB port and you do what it says. Next to that, if you have an OLED monitor or an XDR monitor, one of the really high-end ones, they have greater color depth. And this one technically isn't up to that on those they're real expensive monitors. Also, this one will only allow you to calibrate 2 monitors. You might think that for most people, that's plenty. I, however, have 3 monitors. So if I want to be able to calibrate them all at the same time, I need to go up. And I have this one, which is called the Display Pro HL. This will do any monitor that you can throw at it. It also does one other thing, and this is for you guys that use projectors or you're involved with a camera club. It will also calibrate a projector. So these have gotten more expensive. I think this is like $249, something like that. The nice thing about this thing is it's $119. So if you don't want to spend it for yourself, get your camera club to buy one, because the software is free. You just go on the website and download it, and you could share it amongst friends or amongst a group. Oh, rude. Then there's the last one, which is the big one on the right. I have one right here. This is the Color Checker Studio. And it is for doing monitors and projectors and creating custom paper profiles. So we'll talk about that briefly. But I'm not going to run through the whole thing because, frankly, it's fairly boring to watch. But I just wanted to show you, this is the software for the the Display 123 rather. And you just tell it, well, you can see it saw I had 2 monitors. It wouldn't let me show my third. And do you want it to be native or photo? And I just told it I'm doing photography. You then just click on next, and it tells you put the thing on the screen. That's it. You click on measure, and off it goes. In fact, this is a little video where when I was calibrating my monitor the other day. There's the thing, and it's got a little weight on the cable. You just hang it from one end, put it in the space in the middle, hit measure, and off it goes. And then it starts showing the different colors into that circle, and that's how it creates its profile. So basically what's happening is it knows the values. The software knows the values of each of the colors it's sending up. And let's say this green should be 100% green. But when the software reads it, let's, for argument's sake, say it has 5% blue in it. A profile is simply a set of corrections. So what the software will then do for all these patches, and there's 100 something of them, is it will find out what the corrections are for each of those colors to actually show what it needs to be. So what a profile for this would say is, well, when you want 100% green, remember you have to take out 5% blue to get 100% green. And that's basically what a profile is. I'm oversimplifying. There's more to it than that, but that's basically what's going on. And then when it's done, that's it. It just says, okay, you can profile a second monitor or you can just be on your way. It automatically implements it and puts it to use. So you don't have to do anything. Before you ask, how often should you do this? I would say every couple of months. You generally don't want to go longer than that. If you were about to do a big print job, if you're going to send stuff out to the lab and you want to preview it before you send it out, I would do a calibration on it before you do that to get the best results on the screen. Then this is the next software up. It's actually technically it's the same software. The software recognizes what's plugged into the computer. And this one is for, you can see up on the top, it says Calibrate Display Pro HL. That's what I'm using here. There's a lot more options. You see the projector show up. And you can see, now you can see it sees all three of my monitors. You can see the 1, 2, 3 up top there. Again, there are presets and just hit next. And just like with the first one, it says, all right, take off or rotate the lens around and hang the thing on the screen and then put it in the middle there. Now notice here's the target the white brightness, the 120 number. As you adjust up and down on your keyboard to make your brightness up or down, you're going to see jumps. And you may not be able to get exactly to 120. Maybe it'll go down to 107 or up to 140. Try to get it close. If you have to be off, you're better off being slightly under if you can. But it's not that big a deal if you end up at 130 instead of 120.
We also need to calibrate.
Oh, good question. Mac just Sam asked that. So if do you have to calibrate a MacBook Pro? Actually, those screens that you saw going by with the display 123 was me calibrating my MacBook. So yes, you should calibrate your laptops as well. In fact, my laptop has a P3 monitor. Of the other monitors I have these two LGs that are just running sRGB, and then I have an AZO to my left that is running Adobe RGB. So I'm all over the place with my uh, display color depth, but definitely you want to profile everything you got. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you only do one of the three things, you got to do your monitor because that's where you're making all of your editing decisions. So do yourself a favor and do that. So let's assume, all right, we've gone through the monitor calibration. What's next? The next thing are custom camera profiles. Yep, two questions before we go further. Yes.
Hold your distance to calibrate for day and then again for night, bright room versus dark room.
Mhm.
Is that still up?
Okay, good question. The question was in the past, the software would actually ask you if you wanted to have a calibration for day and for night. Is that necessary? Uh, Personally, I've never thought it necessary. Um, but if you have a really bright room and you're running your monitor bright, that's not the best place to be doing your color editing. I've got blackout curtains in my room so that if I'm editing during the middle of the day, it goes black at night. Again, I'm running my monitor at 120 or a little bit lower. So I find that since it's the biggest thing I'm looking at, it's right in front of me and that's where all the light's coming from, that I just have the one profile for all day long. But yes, in the past, they did ask that.
Paul's question fits in at this time of day.
So Paula asks, does the time of day matter? It's not necessarily the time of day, it's how bright the room is. So yes, if you have a very bright room, I highly recommend having some curtains. Again, as I mentioned, I've got these black, what are they called? Blackout? I don't know. Blackout. I have blackout curtains in this room right here, so that if I'm doing color editing, they get closed. So the bottom line is I want the monitor in front of me to be the brightest thing around me. I don't want to have walls that are competing with what I'm seeing here. Anything else? Okay, the color checker passport, which I have right here. And it's been under lots of different iterations over the past 25 years or so. Here's my newest one. Um, some of you have these from years ago. Now, don't tell anyone I said this. They always, what Calibrite slash X-Rite will tell you is, oh, you should replace this every 2 years. Here's the secret part. I have the first one I ever used still, which was in 2002, I think, 2003, one of those years this came out originally. And guess what? It works fine. So you just don't want to leave this thing on the dashboard of your car in August because then all bets are off. But it thing closes up. So if you keep it closed when you're not using, this thing will last basically forever. Might there be some slight changes over the years? Yeah. Is it something you're going to notice on your monitor? Probably not. But it's an important tool because you would think that camera manufacturers have standards for something as basic as red, green, and blue, but they do not. They all have different ideas as to what red, green, and blue could be. In particular, historically, somebody that was different than the other people was Fuji on their cameras because they designed their camera color response to mimic Fuji film, which makes sense. Kodak, when they used to make digital backs, they used to do the same thing. And a lot of time those cameras were favored, and particularly for portrait work, because the colors were so much better than what at the time Nikon and Canon were doing. Sony wasn't even a player then. What this thing does is it gives the software a standard to work off of that will get the color in the right place. And I'll show you in the software, it'll make more sense. So again, what a camera profile does is it actually tells the software how the camera sees color, what it thinks red, green, and blue are. And to create a profile with this thing, all you do is take a picture of it. And I'll show you this in software in a second. And once you have that, the software now knows what your camera thinks red, green, and blue are. And you need to have the white balance and a profile together. They're two separate things. White balance is setting neutral. What a profile does is it tells the software how to get to red, green, and blue from that neutral that you've chosen. Let's take a look in software. Excuse me. Okay, so here's a map with Warwick, New York, which is where we are right now. Let's say you want to get to Redville, New York, which is not really a place, but we're going to say red. So if I chose Warwick as my white balance, my gray balance, and told the software I wanted to get to 100% red, well, the software would know from reading in the patches that it would have to go north 10 miles and east 3 miles, and it would end up exactly in downtown Redville. That's great. However, the white balance is an important starting point because if you were starting in somewhere else like Cleveland and you applied the same profile, well, no, that's a wrong white balance. You're going to end up somewhere else, not in Redville. So the white balance and the profile work together. We'll see that in a minute. The beauty is that if you create a profile for each of your cameras, the colors will all match because they're now using the same target to create colors from those neutrals. So for example, if you're shooting with two different brands of camera and you create a profile for each of them at the place that you're shooting them, when you apply the profile for each camera, the color response on all of your cameras is going to work. Years ago, for anybody that was a wedding photographer that had other people shooting with them, maybe they had a second shooter, if the second shooter would just take a shot of the color checker, you could match the colors from camera to camera without having to do it in software. It just happened automatically. Now, one other thing, it will also correct color under bad lighting conditions. I've mentioned in the past about the desert Southwest, trying to shoot in a place like Monument Valley and not having something like this. When you have all that red dirt reflecting up, it completely pollutes the colors and your camera's auto white balance just can't handle it. It's just a complete failure. Another thing that I've experienced is shooting indoors. I was photographing a gymnastics meet for my niece. And in the arena, there were alternating sodium vapor and tungsten lights. It was a really weird color, even to your eyes. It was like a creamsicle orange color. And the girls' uniforms were mostly this blue, it was blue, silver, and white, if I remember correctly. And even with your eyes under those lights, since the orange color was almost the opposite of the blues lost all their saturation. In fact, they were almost going gray. By taking a picture of the color checker under those lights and then just calling it, arena lighting, I was able to automatically correct the color in all the images shot there because I had created a profile for those lighting conditions. Because again, the target sees the target's being read by the software, and the software knows what the values of all those patches are. If they're wrong, it has to create a correction for it, and that's the profile, the set of corrections. So we're going to do it. Let's go into Lightroom and take a look. Here's a color checker. Okay. So, all right. So here's a color checker, and I just took a picture of it. This actually happens to be in Switzerland. How do I know? I hit I once, and it tells me what camera and what date shot it. And I had to look up to see where I was June 16th last year, and it was Switzerland. And here's the camera, and here's the settings I used and what lens I used. Now, if you look at the histogram up here, you can see it's completely left to right. Excuse me. The one thing you want to make sure you do is you do not want to clip, especially on the right. It's very important. If you clip the data in this white or this yellow, it'll be unusable. Make sure that the exposure is good. But here's how complicated it is to create a profile. You ready? You install the software for the color checker. And again, it's free to download even if you don't have one. You go to export with preset, color checker, camera calibration. Give it a name. I'll call it Switzerland Daylight OM1 Mark II, since that's the camera that shot it. And I hit save. That's it. Up on the top, it says processing the file, and it'll come back with a message eventually, and usually within 30 seconds, that says, okay, the profile's been created. You got to restart Lightroom for the software to see it. I did this earlier for you, so we didn't have to wait. I didn't have to quit Lightroom to show you. But let's go ahead and let's make believe the white balance was set wrong on the camera, like that. That would be really weird. That would be like if you had the tungsten setting on by mistake. Well, if I apply the profile, which is now right here, here's the one I created earlier, it's not going to help. Yeah, it changes the colors, but that isn't very good with that kind of color temperature. So I'll put it back to Adobe Color. Oh, there's the message saying it's been generated. Let's just put it back to as shot.
Question?
Yes, question.
You need to take a picture of the color checker at each location you are shooting.
Okay, the question is, do you have to shoot the color checker at each location you're shooting at? The answer to that is no. But you do want to have one in different lighting conditions. Daylight, cloudy, maybe rainy. And as far as location goes, if you're going to go somewhere where there is a preponderance of some certain color. I mentioned the desert Southwest, so you'd want to create one for there. But conversely, you could be in a green field the morning after a rain, or there's a lot of dew on the grass, and the sun is reflecting off the grass, and green is coming up onto everything. And that's going to make the skin tones go green. If you take a picture of the color checker in that condition as well, it will eliminate that green cast that's gone onto everything. The other time and place to do it is if you're indoors using any kind of artificial lighting, it will capture it. But really, once you get one good daylight shot, that'll take care of 95% of what you want to do. Because what it's telling the software is this is how the camera gets to red, green, and blue. And if you take a look, red, green, blue. And here's CMYK. And then these are colors that exist in nature. The software reads all of these patches, checks to see how off they are from the expected values, and creates a set of corrections. From mixing bits of each of these colors, it can pretty much get any color. So for example, let's go ahead and get a real white balance. I'm going to pick it off. I'll pick it off of this one. So now we have an exact white balance, and we see 5100 with a plus 13 to magenta. Now let's apply the profile. And if we click in here, take a look particularly at these three blues, this green, probably the red. Watch what happens to them. You see them jump. Oh, and this turquoise over here really went. So here's Adobe Color. Oh, okay. So these three, this kind of eggplant color, this turquoise, and the green and red. Again, actually, all the colors are jumping, but those really jump. There we go. That is what the color checker looks like when you hold it out in front of you. So what this is illustrating is if you don't have one of these things, you're living with this and you're already starting at a color deficit. You've already lost a lot of color. The Adobe Color conversion is safe, but it is very desaturated compared to reality. And if you're in a place that's got a tough color balance, this will fix those problems automatically for you. So you don't have to shoot it everywhere you go. But I find it handy to just pick it up and take a shot of it every once in a while because what's really changing through the course of the day is the white balance more so than the color response of the camera. Also, one other thing, don't shoot this thing at sunrise or sunset because then all of that golden color you were going for will get uh, edited out because the target's going to see, well, it's too gold out. We got to fix that. So you want to take a picture of this thing kind of midday. Clear on that? Yes, yes, yes. All right. Let's go back to here. Okay. Then we have our third profile, paper profiles. What do? They do the same thing that our monitor profile and the camera profile do. And it's actually done almost the same way. There's two ways to get them. You can download them from the paper manufacturer or you can create your own. It's obviously a lot cheaper to do it from the paper manufacturer because they're free. The problem is if you have a nice little cheap printer that's not a quote unquote pro printer, nobody makes profiles for them. You only get profiles for the professional level printers. Now, is that absolutely necessary? In reality, no. What you can do, let's say, for example, I have this Canon Echo Tank little inkjet printer. It's about this big. Oh, I don't know if you heard my Echo just started chiming in about the printer. Wants to sell me supplies for it. Um, that just derailed me. Okay, this printer is a wonderful little printer, but there are no profiles for it. So you when you go to print, you can just let the printer try to figure it out, and the results are good, but they're not great. So I created my own. Now I also tried downloading a factory profile for another Canon printer because at least they're kind of trying to use the same ink sets. Is it as good as the custom profile? No, but actually it's a lot better than letting the printer do it in most cases. Question.
Scott, how important is it to use a color checker if you're photographing black and white photos?
Oh, good question. Is it important to use a color checker for black and white photos? Strangely enough, it will help because when it's doing the colors, it's not just fixing the colors and giving the software a way to get to every color. Because of that, it also corrects for the tonal curve. So you're going to find that the curve that is going to be applied to the image is different. It's going to be actually like your eyes are seeing it. So it'll add the contrast changes necessary to match how those colors would look if they got converted to black and white. So yes, it's not as important because black and white's a little has a tendency to be a little more subjective than color, although color, of course, can be somewhat subjective. But yes, it will even help black and whites by giving a best tonal curve possible. Okay, so I just said this. So custom paper profile, yes, you have to do it yourself. It does require hardware, and I'll admit it, this hardware is not inexpensive. This is the spectrophotometer, where those other things are called colorimeters. This can also measure reflected light, and I'll show you briefly how it works. These are about $549, something like that. I haven't looked recently. Oh, yes, quite another question. Yes. Can you use the color checker with the iPhone? Believe it or not, you can. They have an app for it. So if you go on to Calibrate, you have to download the app. I actually did a video for used to be lynda.com and now it's LinkedIn Learning, and it's still up there on how to do a profile with your iPhone. I haven't tried it for years um, because honestly, I didn't find it was worth the effort. for a little bit of better color. So the iPhones have gotten so good with what they do that and they override everything you do also because with the computational photography. So would I bother? Honestly, no, not at this point. So anyway, this will read in patches off of a printed target. So how does that work? The same way we do it with the monitor and the camera, except instead of you having a device or a color checker to read the colors off of, the software directs you to print out a test chart. And I have one right here. This is one that I printed off of my little Canon EchoTank printer. I think EchoTank is Epson, but you get it. You know, the tank printers, under $200. And I also wanted to go to a paper that had no printer profiles available. This is Staples Photoglossy. I really wanted to go generic on this thing and see how good a job it would be. So it directs you to print out the first target. Then you read it in. So there's the device. You actually just click on it and drag it along these patches, and it reads in the whole patch. And it's very quick. I mean, to read in this entire thing, we're talking 20 seconds. Then what it does is after it measures the first one, it figures out how far along you've gotten. And it then generates a second test chart based on the results from reading in the first one. And here's the second text chart. And you can see it's more kind of more pastel-y earth tone, more subtle colors. And then you read this one in. From doing the two of them, after you read in the second chart, that's when it creates the profile. And again, what is a profile? It's a way for the software to have a color standard so that it can create corrections. Same thing, you look at a red patch and the red patch has got too much blue in it. The software sees that, it creates the correction in the profile so that when you then send that file out to your printer, if you go through the profile, it will say, okay, this spot is 100% red. Remember, we have to take out 5% blue or whatever the thing was. That's really all these things profiles are. So we've got a monitor profile, we've got a camera profile, we've got a paper profile. Again, the most important one being your monitor profile. Well, then we have something called soft proofing. And soft proofing is where the softwares, Photoshop and Lightroom, will show you a simulation on screen of what the printed image is going to look like. Yes and no. It's going to be pretty close. But what you have to remember is that you're looking at a backlit RGB device to see all your colors. That's what your monitor is. Where when you're looking at a print, you're looking at a CMYK set of colors on a paper that you are getting the color information influenced by the light that's hitting it. So if you're just looking at it at any generic light, you're going to have a color shift on it. So what is the answer? Usually, one, buy yourself a couple of daylight lamps. You can get them fairly inexpensively and look at your images under that. Two, open the windows because really sunlight is what these things are standardized around. So you're going to get very close. And when you look at the soft proof, you can make adjustments. But when you make adjustments, they're going to get introduced to something else called rendering intents. You've probably seen the words. I'll explain in a second. There's a question to answer. Yes. Oh, good question, Paula. How often should you create a paper profile? Once. Once you create it, you're done. Unless something were to if you buy a different paper, like if the paper gets a different name, if it used to be premium glossy and all of a sudden it's something else, it may shift a little bit. But realistically, I have paper profiles I've been using for the past 15 years that are fine because there's actually only a couple of people, even though there's lots of people that make paper, there's only a couple of people that actually coat the papers. They're often separate companies. So it's the coating that has the big effect on if a profile were to change. Anything else? All right. Rendering intents. Okay. Stay with me. We'll get to the fun stuff in the software. In fact, we'll take a break in a little bit, and then when we get into software, after we get past all this stuff, then we're going to put everything to use. So rendering intents. Rendering intents deal with color that can't be printed. They're colors that are beyond the capable of the ink set, the paper, and the printer to actually accurately produce. And those colors are called out of gamut. That means they're in the file, but your printer can't print them. Well, it's not going to not print them. It's going to print something, but it can't print that color. So what rendering intents do is they decide, all right, how are we going to move those colors that we currently can't print and put them into a space or a color or a tone that we can print. So there are two that you're going to use. There's two in Lightroom, there's four in Photoshop. They shouldn't all be there because there's two of them that will just cause sadness. They should be hidden. They're specialty things. The two you're going to see, the first one is relative colorimetric. And what relative colorimetric does to make everything be able to print is it takes the colors that are out of the printable range and it just simply moves them in to the closest edge that it can do. So for example, we have these five spots here. It will take those colors and move them into an appropriate place. So when do you use relative colorimetric? One, when you only have a little bit of color out of gamut that you can't print. And you're wondering, well, Joe, how do I figure that out? We'll see that in software in a minute. If you only have a little bit of color out of gamut, relative colorimetric is going to give you the most accurate color because the colors that were already in gamut don't move. It's also good for printing on matte paper. So if you have a primary color you really don't want moving, relative colorimetric is good because otherwise you could have one pixel that it can't be printed. And if you use the other rendering intent, it could change the entire color tone of the entire image just because one color can't be printed, one little dot can't be printed. However, the other one is called perceptual rendering. And perceptual rendering does the same thing. It takes those colors and puts them into a printable space. Here's the however. When it moves in, all of the colors that were in the way get shifted. What that does is it maintains the relationship of the previously out of gamut colors to the in gamut colors. That means that if you have a gradation like a big blue sky or any kind of solid gradation, it's going to be reproduced much better because the relationship between the colors stays the same. So the distance, for example, from the previously out of gamut color to the in gamut color gets maintained. They'll both move to maintain that. If you have a lot of out of gamut colors, perceptual rendering is going to give you a better result. And as I mentioned, if you have transitions or gradients anywhere in the image, particularly again a big blue sky, if you have a decent amount of color out of gamut and use relative colorimetric rendering, you could actually end up with banding in the sky. So that's the beauty of perceptual. So what we really need to do is to go into software and put this all to work. So yeah, I think we're done with the theoretical theoretical stuff. Let's jump into Lightroom. Let's jump out of here. Let's jump over into Lightroom. Okay, so I mentioned this was in Switzerland. So here's an image that we want to do an edit to. Ideally, the first thing you should do is if you have a profile, is to apply it. So here's the one we just created, and this is Grindelwald, Switzerland. And you click on it, and did you see the blue? Mostly you notice the blue sky. Look up at the sky. There's the Adobe color, the greens too of the grass, and you see them all. You see them all shift. It's subtle. It's not violent, but we haven't done any editing to the image yet. Now, if we do our edits, if I add some vibrance and saturation, and I'll bring up the exposure, I'll bring down the highlights, open up the shadows. That was too much on the exposure, maybe there. And then some present stuff. And that quickly, let me make a virtual copy so I have one I can bounce back and forth quickly to. We went from there to there. And we know that the colors are correct. Now, the other way to do it, by the way, if let's say I get home from somewhere, a vacation or something, and I want to apply the profile to all the images. Well, what I can do is get this one. I have the profile applied. I'll select the white balance because again, chances are, let's see what the white balance was as shot. Let's see how good the camera did. All right, 5300 with a plus 25 magenta, when in reality, the actual white balance was 5250 on there. Yeah. By the way, you have to be about 300K off. That 5250 is a Kelvin number. You've got to be about 300 off, at least 200 off before you're going to really notice it. And the difference between 25 and 31 on the plus on the magenta is fairly minor. So in some cases, it'll be violent, some cases, it will not. But what I could also do is select my passport shot, select all the images. I could say, like, make believe that all of those images that I just selected down on the bottom, make believe they were all the same. All I would have to do at this point is click on sync. I'll do a check none. What do I want? Treatment and profile, white balance, and calibration. And I would click on synchronize, and the settings from the color checker shot with the profile and the white balance and the tint adjustment would be applied to all the images. So very cool stuff. And basically, you're going to find a lot of your color editing is done because then you can just do your standard adjustments. Now, of course, you might have subjective things. You want something to be a little bit more saturated, etc. But that becomes personal preferences at that point, not technically correct. While we're here, question, Di? Okay. While we're here, I can't I can't leave this image without talking about color temperatures because this is a scene where there are multiple color temperatures going on. And where do you want to look? Where would you look? What do I want to make important? Yeah, there's a little waterfall here. I think that's why I kept it in. This cloud's kind of big. In fact, it's bigger than the mountains. So that's kind of got to go. How can we make this image more interesting? There's the town of Grindelwald way down there. Beautiful place. How can we make it more interesting? Okay, so let's do some local stuff. There's this big patch of green with some yellow in it. Well, let's just do a gradient. I just hit M to give me a linear gradient. Let's make that a little bit darker. And what else? It's a little yellow. Let's make it a little bluer. All right. But there's no variables in it. So let's make it interesting. There's all kinds of clouds around. I'm going to go create a brush, hit K, and I'm going to go in there. Notice I have auto mask on. This is going to be light. We're not looking at objects. And I'm picking areas that I want to make a little bit brighter. Let's see. I think that's pretty good. So let's just bring those up. Imagine that, the clouds aren't hitting there. So we add a little light there. That looks much better. In fact, as we're at it, I come over there a little bit, maybe not quite that much. So I'll bring down the flow and just gently lighten that up. And then I think over here should be darker. So let's hit K again. And I'm going to put auto mask back on. Let's get auto mask because I want to take away from the viewer wanting to go over here that much. And I think I want in here a little darker too. So I hit those spots and I bring down the exposure. That's good. And let's add some dehaze. That'll darken it up a little bit, a little more of clarity as well. The sky's a little dark over here, isn't it? Let's go to, can we select the sky? If we select the sky, what's it going to do? It's going to give us the clouds too, I'm going to guess. Yeah, it did. So, I think we're going to have to do it a different way. I'm going to have to subtract out the clouds. Let's go with the sky, and let's click on here and subtract with the brush. And I've got to make sure auto mask is on now. It is. And I'm just going to, I got to put my flow back up. So let's just go ahead and get those out of there. They're mostly going to end up cropped out. Now, I can hit the O key, which is overlay. That will toggle that on and off. The sky over here is fine. Over here, it's a little too dark. So I'm going to intersect that selection with a a linear gradient. So I click on here and tell it intersect this mask with a gradient. And I'm going to click over here and note, look what it does. It gives me a gradient there that I can then bring the exposure up a little bit to better match right to left. They don't have to be exact. I want to have some variation, but I just wanted to bring it up a little bit. Okay. While we're here, I can't stop myself. What is the composition here? Does it look like it's leaning a little bit? It might not be, but this mountain is kind of sloping down. So let's hit the R key and I'm going to straighten out the mountains. And how do we make it a stronger image? Well, the fence is interesting. The town is interesting. Obviously, the mountain peak. This is a little too powerful, and the cloud's too powerful. So let's get rid of that stuff. I see this as a vertical, and I think I'm going to like it as a legal size. So I'm going to choose 14 by 8.5, and then I'm going to drag it until I get my vertical. And I think that's probably the image. Maybe a little more. Yeah, I think that's really the image right there. And stay with me because there's a method to, there's a reason I'm doing this. And I'm going to add a vignette. And again, when you think that I'll go full screen, we started with that, and now we have something that I think is much more interesting. So let's say I want to print this. Well, before I print it, we have to do something called soft proofing. I want to see what this print's going to look like. So I did create a profile for my little Canon printer back there by printing out the targets, which I showed you, and running them in so I could have a profile for that particular printer. But let's come up, and I'm going to hit the, before I do anything else, I'm going to hit the S key, which is where you get to see soft proofing. This used to come up automatically right down here, and Lightroom decided to change it. So the S key goes to soft proofing. And notice the histogram changes up here. And where we were used to seeing shadow and highlight clipping, we have all this new stuff. And look at this one. This one up here. That's monitor clipping. Those are colors in this image that this monitor is not capable of accurately showing you. It's doing the best it can, but it's warning you that those colors are outside of the ability of this monitor to completely show it. Now, if this was a P3 monitor, I'd probably be safe, but just nothing you can do about that one. This are the colors that are out of the printer's gamut right here. If I click on that, all this stuff in red is going to change. Now, it's going to change like you see it on the screen. But if I click on profile, you can see if I do display P3, oh, it's even worse. Interestingly enough, sRGB is going to be even worse. So those are all the colors that are in this image that sRGB can't accurately show you. Yet, my little Canon printer with my Staples photo paper has a bigger color gamut than my monitors. That's telling you something, isn't it? So what could we do anything about this? Should we do anything about this? Well, I'm more concerned about the sky, and the sky is fine. It can print just fine. It isn't an issue. It's these colors here. So if I turn off this warning, let's zoom into 100% on that. If I turn this warning on, it's telling me it's typically very saturated greens that the things fall apart. Yep, they are. So could I fix it? Well, I could. What I could do is come down to the color mixer and get the eyedropper and pick it right. Notice when I put it over the red, it's actually showing me the green underneath. If I were to bring the saturation down a little bit, let's see what happens. I'll just bring the saturation down. And look at that, all the red disappears. So the issue is that color green at that saturation can't be printed by the printer. If I move it down to here, now it's pretty much all within gamut. I could also adjust the hue to see if I like any of those better. Maybe I want it a little greener. And do I want it brighter or darker? If I make it brighter or darker, Just that green is being affected. So you can see that you can get rid of those problem colors. You're going to find it more with the saturated greens and blues. But now we look at this and all right, it's looking pretty good. I like the way it's looking, except it needs more contrast now. So this is the beauty of soft proofing, because what soft proofing is showing you is it's going to show you what it's going to look like on your print before you print it. So these edits that you make are going to be specifically for this print. And you end up saving this as what's called a proof copy so that you can have this specific for this paper. So let's say I want, oh yeah, I need more contrast. And I'm going to bring the exposure down. Maybe bring the whites down a little bit. And I could also play with the color temperature. Do I want a little warmer? Let me see. I want a little warmer. Oh, look what happens if I go bluer. If I decided I want it bluer, look what happens to the sky. Same thing starts to happen. The sky starts to be out of gamut to be colored, to be printed rather. Actually, I think that looks pretty good. But again, I can make more adjustments here. That's how it's going to print. I'll go ahead. Did I add a, I already added a vignette? Yeah. Okay. So again, it is now showing me, if I go to full screen, that is what the print is going to look like when I send it to my printer. And there's no guessing. Now, Photoshop is going to give us a whole lot more options. Let's see, what time is it? Okay, it's 7:59. We're an hour in. Let's just take 5. I'm going to get up and warm up my coffee, and we'll pick up again in 5 minutes, all right?
How would it be to send you the file?
For the printer and the Staples paper, sure. Yeah.
I didn't know what kind of paper she was using.
Yeah. Oh, she had the other page. So, Paula, you had mentioned to Diane, if you can still hear me. Yep, there you are. This, if you want the print, if anybody has one of these Canon tank printers and wants the profiles for the Staples Photo Glossy, just send me a note and it's just a little file. I'll just email it to you. Paula, you also have some of those other profiles, those other papers that we had used in previous years. I can resend you those profiles as well. There's a company that makes Red River makes papers that I love legal size. That's the beauty of this printer is it prints legal size. And this shape, this kind of it ends up printing like 8 by 13. I had mats custom cut for this that are 12 by 18. And 12 by 18 is a standard frame size. And it's a really nice size print for landscapes, and both vertically and horizontally. So I'll send you guys the links to the 2 papers that are on Amazon that allow you to use the Canon and the Epson EchoTank printers, print legally, print legal size, and get stuff like this. It really is nice. So Paul asks, is he correct in thinking that you're going to use perceptual more than relative? And the answer is maybe.
Maybe.
The answer is maybe. But here's the thing: I'm not going to make you guess. When we're starting up again, I'm going to show you where you see what the difference is going to be, so you can make that call. Because
Good,
when you actually go out to print, let's say like for example, you can see up in here that it says intent perceptual relative, and it's chosen for relative right now for this image. If I click on perceptual, it will show us the rendering intent. And you can see under perceptual for this particular image, it gets a little brighter. Can you see that? I don't know how well you see it on your screens.
Yeah.
If I go there, perceptual relative, see how relative's a little darker? In this case, for this printer, and it's going to change. The same image, your rendering intent is going to change depending on what paper and printer you're going to. In this case, relative is better. Because if you think about it, remember we were talking about perceptual is good if you have a lot of color out, where relative is better, more accurate if you don't. Well, remember when I showed you all of that red down in the green that couldn't be printed? When I used the dropper to select that green and bring its brightness and saturation down a little bit, I got rid of almost all of the color that was out of gamut for that printer and paper. So that made relative a better choice. We'll go to something a little bit brighter, a little more saturated, and see the answer to fix that. Okay, onward. So actually, Paul. It was a good lead in because I've got these profiles. So by the way, after you create a profile, let's go back to let's get out of the proofing. We'll hit S to go back to normal. When you're in the basic panel and you have these profiles, when you first create it, they're not going to show up. And by the way, these Adobe Landscape, Portrait, Standard, etc., these are the ones that are the same on your cameras. The problem is every one of them without fail is kind of gaudy. I really don't like any of them. So, I mean, you could try monochrome, but what if you create a new profile, you need to click on Browse, and that will show you all of the ones that they give you. And then as you scroll down, you'll come to camera matching, and I think mine are down the bottom. Yeah, so here are some of the ones that I've created, all shown over this particular image. Interestingly enough, to kind of prove my point, here is a profile created for Moab. And if I choose it, and if I want it to show up in my list, there's a little star up here. You click on that, and then that saves it to your favorites list. Then you hit done. Now, when I come up to profile, you'll see the Moab one shows up. Interestingly, the Moab versus the, so it's very, I am actually seeing a slight change if I look real close. Interesting. I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in a bit. Take a look at the greens. This is the Switzerland one. Did you notice can you see that it's shifting slightly yellow? Were you seeing that? I mean, just kind of stare right in this area here. I don't know how well it translates over Zoom. Do you see a little yellow disappears? So, and which is not unexpected because Moab has a lot of that red rocks. So it's going to end up kind of going warmer naturally. But interestingly, it's not a huge difference. That's why you can get away with using your daylight profile pretty much everywhere. But if you really want to be exact, having one from the location does help. So let's take a look at another one and see if it'll give us a little bit more of a violent. Okay. So so here's our image. I'm going to hit S again, which brings us, now it's not offering to, I'll have to get one that it doesn't have a proof copy already. It's not offering to allow me to create what's called a proof copy where it will build all this stuff in. Because if you look underneath here, as I highlight this, you can see it says Epson 8720 luster paper on a Canon. That's it because it's a proof copy with that profile already built into it. And you can see it up here. I created a profile on my Canon 8720 printer, which by the way is a hidden gem. Canon makes it and almost doesn't want you to know about it. It's a 13 by 19 or 13-inch carriage printer. It's a 6-ink. I think it's a 6-ink. And it's like $249. It is ridiculously good. And it's a really nice printer. The problem is because it's not a pro printer, that there are no profiles that from either Canon or from the companies that sell paper. If you use one of the Canon Pro 10 or Pro 100 profiles for the papers, it'll be pretty close. But what I did, I had this Epson paper sitting around, Epson luster, premium luster paper, and I put it in the Canon and I created a profile for it. And here it is for this particular image. If I want to see how it looks through the Staples gloss, look at the difference. There's the 8720 perceptual, and you can see some of the red. Can you see the red in here? That's showing that those are colors up beyond. Let's choose the little Staples Canon printer. Look at that. Even though the tonality changed a lot, that silly little Canon printer I have has a greater color gamut than my big Canon printer. Now it made everything lighter. So let's take a look and see if relative is better. And look what happens there. So in this case, because the little Canon printer for some reason has a greater gamut than my big Canon printer, relative is a better choice than perceptual. Because again, there's less color out of gamut. Now, if I start messing with this, if I start adding a bunch of saturation, let's add a lot of, oh, it's even, I can add that much vibrance, it works. But look, when I added saturation, all of the oranges underneath the arch became out of gamut. They can't be printed. If I look at it perceptually, yeah, it still can't be printed. On the Staples paper, I'm going to guess on the Epson paper, it gets worse. Look at that. The Epson paper on the big Canon can't even print that blue, while the Staples paper on the little Canon can. So again, you don't know if relative or perceptual is going to be the better answer. That's where the soft proofing comes in, because you get to see. So let's say I do want to change this. Well, I brought the saturation up really just to show you what happens. I actually, I like the sky a little darker there. Let's go ahead and leave that. But if I bring this to where I want it, I'm going to push the orange until it really starts going red. So see how you can see down underneath the arch, it's turning bright red. That's the warning that it's out of gamut now. However, I'm going to get the color mixer again, get the eyedropper, and click in where the red is, and bring down the saturation just a smidge, just on that color. And look, all the red goes away. It was just a little over. Look at that, 4 points, and it all went away. And now this print is going to print like this. And in fact, let's see. And again, this is a $189 printer using Staples glossy paper. And with the profile, I say it's going to print like that screen because that's what we're looking at. And again, I don't know how well it's going to look through my video feed to you guys, but look, here it is.
Sharing your screen.
Oh, you can't see me? Oh, Diane's going to do it. Okay, so Vanna sitting next to me now has the print. And if she could just frame it so that it's actually in the screen. She's new at this. Yeah, look. Look over here. Put your head around this. There you go. So there's the print out of the little Canon printer with a profile, with the Staples glossy paper, and it is actually stunning. Yeah, it doesn't completely translate through holding it up to the video camera, but trust me, and Diane can look at it. She'll vouch for me. And believe me, she would tell you if I was wrong. But if she turns it, if she turns it around, now we're also looking at it under our room lights. When I looked at this print earlier, under daylight, it's stunning. So there you go. Do you need a 12 ink printer for little prints? The answer is no. If you have a profile for the papers, it all goes away. So yes, this device is pricey. But if you guys are part of a camera club, get them to spend the $550 and share it amongst yourselves, because they're good, for a long time. And you guys could create all your own paper profiles. Any questions?
Wait a minute. In the print module,
Mm-hmm. Oh, print module. We didn't get there yet. Yeah. We're going to head there. So Paul, I'm going to move over to the print module because I want to print this. So now that we have the image exactly the way we want, now we go to print. So let's click on the print module.
while you're in there, he's got a question.
Yes, he's got a question.
Right column at the bottom, print adjustments of brightness and or contrast. Is there any way to get a preview of the results of changing the brightness or contrast without actually making the print?
Do you mean in the print job over here? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about in the develop module?
Right here. Yeah, right there.
Right here. Yeah.
Right there. Mhm.
Yes. Never touch this stuff.
Right.
Never touch it.
Okay. But the print adjustment below it, right below there.
Yes.
where it
Never
says printed-
never touch that.
Yeah. You know what? You can't preview it. So what point does it have other than printing it?
You're shooting from the hip. That's
Yeah.
again, that's when you're in a closed system and you know that your printer always happens for some reason to look better if you make it a little brighter and a little more contrasty,
Mhm. Okay.
but that's not going to translate to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So
Understand.
yeah, again, if you have all your profiles set up correctly, like we're doing, there's no need to ever touch that. Because if you
Okay.
start messing with this print adjustment stuff and start messing with any kind of color stuff, then you just basically bypassed everything we just did.
Yeah.
So here's our image. Let me go into page setup where it's a landscape. So let's do that. And this is the legal paper. And here's the printer, by the way. It's a Canon 3060. I go to presets. Here's my Staples Glossy. And that should give me the right paper size again. Hit save. No, my page setup. Oh, here it is, legal. Let me set that back to letter and hit OK. And there, if that looks familiar, here, Diane's going to hold it up in front of her screen again. Back off a little, Di. There we go. There it is. That's the image that came off of this printer, and that's it. Now, here's the thing, and this is the problem. We decided that when we looked at it here, that we liked the relative better. And actually, as I'm looking at it, I'm kind of torn. I like how perceptual opens up this side, but I like relative back here differently. Better. So what's the answer? Because there's perceptual, and this is too light. That's relative. That's too dark. I like how perceptual is doing this part. I don't like this. So what do? I fix it. Let's get hit K to get a brush. And I'm just going to come down in here. I'm on auto masking. So let's just darken that stuff up a little bit. Let's add contrast to it and maybe some clarity. A little dehaze too. There we go. That looks better. And there's the before and after. Yes, that's what I was after. That looks better. Ooh, I have a spot there now. Can you see it? Way over. There's a spot right there. So let's get our Band-Aid tool for that one. And that's gone. Okay. There we go. So again, that's the beauty of soft proofing. I liked how relative did a certain part of it, but perceptual did a better part. So I adjusted it on screen. Now I'll send it to print. And what did I decide? I can't even remember. We decided, okay, now the way it's edited, perceptual is the best choice. This does not automatically carry over to the print module. That's the problem. Because if you do relative versus perceptual here, you don't get to see it. So you only get to see it on the develop module screen. So you had that part you have to remember. But now I just click on print and off it goes. And this is what comes out of the printer. So that's going out to the printer. While we're here, let's say I want to send this out to the lab to have a lab print made. So how do I do that? So let's go back to the develop module. We've already got the proof set up, but what are we profiling to? What is your lab going to print this on? If it's going to be a photo printer, we need to look at the profile as sRGB. If they're going to go out to a large format inkjet printer, those printers they have like 12 inks in them. So they have a much greater color gamut beyond Adobe RGB. So at that point, you need to ask your lab, if you're going to have a print other than a regular photo print, what color space do they want? And if they're going to go out to a big format printer, they're going to want either an Adobe RGB or a ProPhoto RGB file. You need to ask them, but then you can choose that in here and say Adobe RGB, and look what happens when we choose Adobe RGB. Those oranges underneath are beyond Adobe RGB. But again, if they're using a 12 ink large format printer, those printers are actually closer to ProPhoto. They're way beyond Adobe RGB. So in that case, you would have to tell it ProPhoto RGB, which means I'd have to go in and load it in. Let's see, where is it? Oh, I'd have to go back in and let's see, would display profiles give it to me? Let's see, they're alphabetical at least. P. Now, up there it is. Okay. Let's add ProPhoto RGB into that. What in the world was that? Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Obviously a problem. Okay, so I'll have to look into that. Let's see what Display P3 does. Actually, Display P3 can show it. That's very interesting. So again, Adobe Display P3 is a slightly shifted Adobe RGB. And interestingly enough, since Display P3 has more oranges and reds than Adobe RGB, none of that is out of gamut. So I would say that would be a safe color space to send off to a large format printer. Interesting. So I'm going to hit S to come out of the soft proofing thing. And the background changes color when we're going to soft proofing. I want to send this out to the lab. How do I do that? Everything is good. The image is edited the way I want. We soft proofed it for the color space. If the lab is willing to give you a profile for their printer, great. But if they're going out to a standard lab printer, sRGB is fine because that's what they work in. If they're going out to a large format, they will tell you, give us Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB. Now, ProPhoto RGB is Lightroom's default. It's actually what it's working underneath behind the scenes. You have no control over that. So if this is ready to go to the lab, you simply go to File, Export. And we're going to go out to hard drive and ask it what to do. So where's it going to go? Well, I go out to the desktop and I can say specific folder because I generally on my desktop have a folder called For the Lab. So there it is, For Lab. I would just choose that. If I want to put it in a subfolder, I could say, all right, February 2025 prints. All right. Do I want to rename it? Yes. I generally want to rename it as a custom name with the original file number. My custom name is going to be my name with the original file number so that if they can find the file should they need to. The video doesn't apply. File settings. What does the lab want? If they're going out to a lab printer, they probably want a JPEG. If they're going to go out to a large format printer, they usually want a TIFF. So again, you ask them. So we'll say there's going to be a big print. Let's say I want a TIFF. Compression none. Color space. If it's going out to a large format, I would send them a ProPhoto RGB file because ProPhoto RGB has all the colors that are possible. Can a large format printer print ProPhoto RGB? No, no printer can, but they can print beyond Adobe RGB. So giving it the biggest color space it can have is going to give you most of the color reproduction that you want. Bit depth. I don't even know why this is listed as an option. You always want 16-bit. Stay away from this, the HDR stuff. Just stay away from it. Image sizing. The answer is no, don't touch this. There is no reason for you to touch this. The only bad thing's going to happen. You know from your pixel size how big a print you can make. I'm gonna hit done for right now. Let's look at this image. This is not that big an image because it's already been cropped in. So look, how many megapixels is that? What is let's see, 4577 times 3433. All right, it's a little under 16 megapixels. All right, it's been cropped down. That's fine. How big can I print this? Well, all you need to know is the big number, 4577. If I'm having this, printed on a big canvas print, for example, if I divide that by 150, which is how many DPI a canvas print is printed at, look at that. This is fine for a 30-inch print. In fact, you could go beyond that. So 30 inches, the 24 by 30 would be no problem for this file. How low can you go with canvas? You can go down to 125 and you're not going to see a difference. So if I change that to 125, I can go 24 by 36. So what I'm telling you is that a 16 megapixel file has no trouble being a 24 by 36 print that will look perfect. You won't be able to see any difference between that and a 300 DPI print. I promise you. If any of you can prove me wrong, I'll buy you a drink. But if I'm right, you got to buy me a drink. So, and I know I'm going to win. So anyway, back to the export part. All right, I gave it a name, a TIFF, no compression. I left it in ProPhoto RGB. Again, never touch image sizing. There's no reason to. Got our file settings. Output sharpening. No, don't. You did your sharpening during your editing process. Don't do it again. Metadata, yeah, sure. Why would you not want to include all your metadata unless, you know, you're doing something, you've got pictures of somebody that you're going to blackmail them with and you probably don't want your name in it. Watermarking, no. Post-processing, do nothing. Then you simply click on export and you have a file ready for a large format printer. The one thing I would change if I'm going out to a lab printer, if I'm just having conventional, you know, conventional photo lab prints done, the thing I would change would be JPEG on the format and color space as sRGB. Because that's what those, oh, and quality, I'll leave it at 100. And click on export. And I'll call this, I'll change the name, photo print, as rather than the large format, and click on export. And now I have a file ready to go out to a large format inkjet printer. So if I wanted, say, a nice 20 by 30 canvas of this, I can get that. Actually, I might do that. What do you think of this image? I think this deserves a canvas. Yeah, I think I'll get a canvas of this. And if I wanted some photo prints that I'm not going to print myself, there we go. Any questions before we move on? Because we're at 8:30 and we haven't even touched Photoshop yet. Oh, what happens with Photoshop? Let's do this one. I love this tree. But it needs help. It's good. And we could do our soft proof here, but no, we've done soft proofing and it's going to be exactly the same. Just to show you real quick, if I hit S with the Staples Glossy, there's a little bit of the sky, a little bit of that blue it does not like. However, as I look at it, I think that sky is a little too blue. I think it needs a little saturation pulled out of it. So let's select the sky. I'm going to hit the O key, which will get rid of the green overlay. That's the O is the cycles your overlay. And I'm just going to bring the saturation down a little bit. And voila, gone. And I think that looks better on that sky anyway. So I know that that's what that's going to print like. But we're going to do this in Photoshop. And again, if I go relative versus perceptual, look at the difference. By the way, if you go relative versus perceptual and nothing changes on the screen, what that means is there are no colors at a gamut. So if you have a relatively flat, unsaturated image, maybe it's a foggy day kind of thing, typically the colors in images like that are not going to have any out of gamut colors. So the answer is, if nothing changes here, then it doesn't matter which one you choose. As I look at this, once again, there are parts of, I like the contrast of the perceptual. I like the shadows of the relative. So what I would do is go with perceptual and then darken up where I want. But instead, we're going to send this into Photoshop. So I'm going to come out of our soft proofing thing and Command E to send this with our Lightroom adjustments into Photoshop. Oops. And 0. Okay. All right, so here's my image in Photoshop. Do I want to edit it? Let's do a soft proof first. So where do you do soft proofing in Photoshop? It's actually up under View. So you go to View, Proof Setup, Custom. And then you get Custom Proof Conditions. And look, here's similar stuff. What paper are we using? Well, let's see. Here's our Staples gloss. We can see what that looks like. And then let's go relative versus perceptual. And we get a similar result. Notice there are two others. Saturation and absolute color metric. I could tell you what they're for. but there's nothing good can come from you ever using them. So trust me to leave them alone. They should be hidden. They're for very specific conditions that don't apply to general photography. So go with me on that. Perceptual relative colorimetric. So there's perceptual. There's relative colorimetric. Again, I like the shadows in the relative. I like some of the brights in perceptual. Black point compensation should be turned on. It's what it's doing is it's kind of showing you're going to lose some density of your blacks. That's fine. And that's just specific for this paper. Because if we choose another paper, let's try that Epson Luster. Now when we do relative versus perceptual, isn't that interesting? And on this paper, the perceptual is darker. Again, that's why you have to go through this process. And the black point compensation is more subtle. Fascinating. These things down here, the display options on screen, this is a very sad bit of software. This has been here for 30 years, these options, and they haven't worked in 30 years. They are an absolute joke. So if I click on Simulate Paper Color, no, the paper doesn't affect the print that much. If I click on Simulate Black Ink, it just makes it lighter. But if you choose Simulate Paper Color, the paper's not going to make it go that dull. If anything, it's going to go the opposite way. So these are bad. Never touch these, but do choose black point compensation. And we are in preview. We are actually looking through the profile. So again, if we go back to our Staples Photo Glossy, perceptual relative, okay, I like the bright parts of perceptual better. So let's leave it there. And we have something else up in here. If you go to view, we have a gamut warning underneath proof colors that will show us in colors if there's any colors at a gamut. Nothing right now, but those settings are still on. If you go under view, notice they're still both checked. So if we were to come into our adjustments and go to hue saturation and increase the saturation, oh, look what happens. As we start to increase the saturation, my warning color I have set in Photoshop, I have it set for green. The reason is it's an unnatural color, so it's easy to see. So as I boost the overall saturation of this image, it goes in and it shows me, wow, look, those areas those are at a gamut colors now. Is it necessarily a problem? No, because I actually liked what it did to the saturation inside the image. So in Photoshop, when you do these adjustments, they're all done with masks. So I can, just like we do in Lightroom, come up to select sky, because I didn't really want the sky to change. There's our sky selected. I can then click on the mask for the hue saturation adjustment layer, hit X to put black in the foreground, and then Alt Delete or Alt Backspace to fill that part of the mask with black. So what I just did was, if I Alt and click on the mask, there's the mask. We just stopped the mask from getting that saturation, but we got the saturation in the front of the image, which, by the way, looks great. Look at how much pop that adds. I really needed that. As I'm looking at the image, what is maybe a little too saturated? Anywhere else? Maybe here. Maybe the yellow up top here. And again, that's the beauty of having these things on a mask. So I can get a brush, which is the B key, and I'll make my brush a little bigger. And I'm going to paint at, let's say 60%. So I just hit 6 on my keyboard and notice the opacity jumps to 60%. Oops, what did I do? I painted on the layer rather than on the mask. Click on the mask. All right, so now let's paint on there. That's a little too bright. And these yellows up here are a little too yellowy. Let's bring those down. It doesn't really look like I'm doing much, but and it's cumulative, by the way. I can keep going over and it will keep making that a little bit darker. All right, I think those things are still a little too bright, but now let's look. So now you can see it's doing the bright parts here. It's adding green to the juniper, and it's adding some color back in here. I'm going to bring this down a little more. I'm going to jump up to 80%, make my brush a little bigger, And just, I don't really want it to affect that top. That's looking pretty good. Now let's do one with light. So let's go to, what do we want to do? Curves. Now let's do levels. We'll keep it simple. Let's do a levels adjustment. I'm going to darken the image, but I'm going to change something. I'm going to change the blending mode to luminosity. What that does is it darkens without causing any shift in the color. However, I just want to do this in a few spots. So I'm going to fill it with black again, Alt Backspace, and now I'll hit X to paint with white and use this just to bring down a couple of spots that are dark. I want to make some of the darker spots darker. Make that thing a little darker. And let me get, I don't need this thing. Let's get rid of it. Darken in there. And, oh, something else I want to do. I want to make the trunk of this stand out. So I'm going to go to a color balance. And we're going to zoom in on the trunk. Strangely enough, I was playing with this before, and I think Photoshop thought that the trunk was the subject. So let's try that. Select subject. And yeah, kind of. Well, not to really, didn't really help that much. Let's go back to color balance. And let's look at the trunk. I could select it first. It really doesn't matter. I'm just looking at the trunk right now. I think the trunk needs to be a little cooler, a little grayer, a little bluer, less yellow in it. Midtones, highlights, let's see. Yep, there. We're going to end up bringing the saturation down a little as well. Yeah, I think that's kind of the look. But again, we don't want it to happen over the entire image. So Alt Backspace to fill that with black. And now we'll paint with white on the trunk. And I'm going to work at 100%. So I just hit 0 on my keyboard. And look, as I do that, there's some colors in there that it doesn't like. Those greens, those light greens that it's creating are out of gamut, which is fine, because let's do another hue saturation. And I'm going to bring down, actually, I'm going to take the finger pointer thing, click right on where it's green, and bring it down there. Look at that. Bring down the saturation, and that's gone. Yes, question.
Do you prefer to send out to a lab from Lightroom or Photoshop?
Good question. Question was, do I prefer to send out to a lab from Lightroom or Photoshop? I think it depends on how extreme the edit was. Something like this, there's a lot going on. I think I might prefer this from Photoshop, but I would say really the majority are pretty easy to do from Lightroom at this point. So I think I would say most of them are going to be Lightroom. All right, as I look at this, I think the saturation overall, I like it, but it's a little too strong. But the beauty is of Photoshop is I can just turn this down a little. And again, remember that while we're doing this, the entire time, notice proof colors and gamut warning are on. We are editing this image for that particular paper. So this is specifically being edited for that Staples Photo Gloss. If I want, so if I wanted to send this to the printer, I could just click on, hit Command P, send it to print, make it a vertical, and I can go through, I forgot, what were we? I've already forgotten. This is the one thing that's been like this forever. I wish they'd fix it. If I go back to view, whoops, I got to come out of here. Let me hit done. View proof setup custom. What were we? Oh, perceptual. Okay. Remember that, Joe. Perceptual. Okay. Print. So here's our print options from Photoshop to send out to the printer. Make sure Photoshop manages colors, because if you let printer manage color, then everything you did was just a waste of time. I'm not printing to the Epson Luster. I'm printing to the Photo Gloss. 16-bit, yes. Black point compensation, not relative, perceptual. And then there's stuff about fitting to the page size, so I can tell it, go ahead and fit to the page. It shows me the print resolution. Do you need any of this other stuff? No. And then I click print, and something beautiful happens again, which I will hand to Diane, because I printed this as well. And if you look at Diane, you can see there's the print. And all I can do is I can promise you that when you hold it up next to the screen, under daylight, not under all my little LED lights all over the place, it looks just like the screen. Within reason, I always understand that you're looking at reflected light versus transmitted light, but it's pretty darn close. And even under these lights, it's actually quite a beautiful, what do you think of that? Isn't that a beautiful print? It's a beautiful image. So anyway, it's a little juniper. This is Capitol Reef National Park, by the way. We were here in November, and we were there and no one else. Hardly. It's a great place to go because it's a little remote and doesn't get that much traffic. So that's how I send out for printing. I already printed it, so I'm going to say done, but I have all of this stuff going on here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I could either flatten it, or I'm going to hold down the Alt key. This little 3 lines here is the layer menu. I'm going to click on that and merge visible. I'm holding down the Alt key just so I have all of these masks should I decide I want to re-edit it for some other purpose. Maybe I'm going to go out to a different printer or send it out to a different paper. This one is all of these adjustments we made to the base. If I hide all these, you see we started there, we ended up there. This is this flattened, but it kept all of the layers. That's called a stack. So to get that, you have to have the Alt key. If I click here and you see merge visible, it flattens it. I don't want to do that. You have to hold down the Alt key, and there was no indication whatsoever on the screen that anything different is going to happen. So the Alt is the magical key in all things Adobe. If I click on Merge Visible, that's what it does. I have an extra, but anyway. All right, so I want to send this one to the lab. We have some more steps to go through when we're dealing with Photoshop versus dealing with Lightroom. First of all, where's it going? If it's just going out to a photo printer, I can simply click on Convert to Profile, and I don't want to send it to my paper profile. Right now, this image is in ProPhoto RGB because everything coming out of Lightroom is in ProPhoto RGB. You don't have any control over that. But I do want to tell it to go to, for a photo printer, I want to tell it, go to sRGB. Did you see the image just darken a little bit? Let me turn that back from our paper. Let's, where'd it go? Staples Photo Gloss. See, it's brighter. Watch what happens when I go to sRGB. So there is a gamut change. See, it gets a little darker. So now let's look at sRGB, perceptual versus relative, and not seeing the difference. So that's okay. But now the image has gotten a little bit darker when I changed it to sRGB. So I am going to go to brightness contrast, add a brightness contrast layer. I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. I think the contrast is fine, just a little bit brighter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this brightness contrast, and at the beginning of it, for my own records, put sRGB. So that I know that adjustment is specifically because I want to send this out as an sRGB file. So what I need to do now is go to Edit, Convert to Profile, sRGB. Again, I look perceptual, relative, no real difference that I can see. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. Black point compensation's on. Hit OK. It just converted the file from Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB to sRGB. Now I can save a copy. And notice down here now, see it says embed color profile. Now it sees that this is now an sRGB file, not a ProPhoto RGB file. Because if you send a ProPhoto RGB file to a lab that's going to print on an sRGB printer, you're leaving the color shift, the color management in part to them. And some labs are good at it and a bunch of them are not. So I would just then tell it, oh, on my desktop, where is my for lab? There it is. There's my lab for lab file. Give it a name. And again, I would put my name in it. And I don't want to save it as a Photoshop file. Again, going out to a lab printer, JPEG, and it says it has to be saved as a copy. That's fine. And I'll send it at the highest quality. One more time, I'm going to back up. I'm going to go to history here. I'm going to get rid of the convert to profile. And I'm going to see what this looks like when we proof color, not to sRGB, but to, let's see, Adobe RGB. It got darker again. Perceptual, relative. So, but no change there. So again, what this is saying is that that Canon printer with that Staples glossy paper prints brighter than we see here. So we need to adjust for that. And actually, I had that brightness layer. All right, I got to do that again. Let's go to brightness. And all right, let's say I'm going to have this done on a canvas or something. Maybe I don't want it quite so saturated. Maybe I'll do a different saturation for it as well. So let's create a new saturation layer. I'm going to bring it down a little. Yeah, just a little bit. And I will rename this hue saturation. I'll put Adobe RGB in front of it as a reference that this is a layer only to be used when this is being exported to an Adobe RGB file. So again, we'll go to Edit, Convert to Profile. By the way, it's always convert to profile, never assign profile. That will wreak havoc with the color in the image. The only reason, just so you know, the only reason to use assign profile is if you are copying an image off of a screen, off of the web, for example, and you bring it into Photoshop, the color's all going to go wacky. You then have to assign sRGB to it for the colors to come back. Don't ever do that here, though. So convert to profile, Adobe RGB. Again, relative and perceptual look the same, so it doesn't matter which we choose. It's going to take it from ProPhoto RGB to Adobe RGB. Hit OK. And then again, save a copy. And the same thing, this time I'll say Adobe RGB. And again, if your lab says ProPhoto, then that's fine. Just leave it there. For lab, they probably want a TIFF file if you're going to go out to a big printer. We don't want the layers, but you see, again, the embed profile has changed. Now it sees that we're saving this as an Adobe RGB file, and then it's going to ask you, do you want compression, etc. Yeah, usually whatever the default settings are is fine. Now you have a file ready to be uploaded. So we took this file and we uploaded it twice. Once for a photo print on a standard photo printer. We also sent it up as an Adobe RGB TIFF file that would be more suitable for going out to a large format. Again, say for example, you're going to have a big canvas print made. They're printed on big inkjets, not on photo printers. Oh, that's a lot. Where are we? Any questions? I know, yeah, I know this was a lot, guys. I understand that. Let's see. Let's go into here. This is an image I've been playing with. Okay, here's a TIFF file that's been edited, but it hasn't been edited as a proof copy. And I haven't shown you this yet because I had been playing with all the other images already. But notice when I hit the S key to go into soft proofing, there's a thing up here called Create Proof Copy. This is where it will create another virtual copy of the image that will have all of the information as to what you chose, meaning the paper type and the rendering intent will be built into this, along with the edits that you make particular for this particular print. So again, if I'm going out to, let's go out to, let's do something. I'm going to have a big print of this, and it's going to be done in Oh, we're gonna have send it out to Bay Photo to have a Fujiflex print made, which is way beyond Adobe RGB. So it's gonna be ProPhoto. And unfortunately, there's something screwy with this ProPhoto thing on my computer that doesn't like. So I'm going to tell it Adobe RGB. The reality is when I go to export this file, I will leave it as a ProPhoto file, but it's okay to proof it in Adobe RGB. Why is it okay? Because there's no such thing as a ProPhoto RGB monitor. That's part of the problem. I mean, yeah, there's some testy ones that they've played around with, but not for regular. They're like $20,000 or something. For you and I, the best you're going to get is an Adobe RGB display. ProPhoto RGB has more color in it, yes, but there is no monitor you can look at where you can actually see the color. And if you're happy with what it looks like here, you're good. So relative, perceptual. There's no difference. Or is there? Let's see. Actually, I'm seeing a slight, very slight darkening in the shadows of perceptual that I like better. That's good. So let's send, now it's pretty good. Let's send it into Photoshop. So I'm going to Command E that. All right, here's our image. Let me get rid of this stuff. I think I have one that I was working on where, yeah, right here, where I'd already put the layers in. Okay. I made a copy of the background just in case. So I wanted to change the brightness. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because there's something that happens a lot whenever you do selections with either Photoshop or Lightroom where the masks are less than perfect. So I'm going to bring up the brightness a little bit, but I want to change the sky, just the sky to start. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just want to change the foreground. So let's go to select sky. And it does a miserable job of it. Look what all the stuff it picked. That's not, first of all, it included the lighthouse and it included all of this stuff as well. That's not particularly helpful. So how do you fix that? Because let's go ahead and do an adjustment. Let's say I want to make the sky a little bit darker. So uh, we'll do it as a brightness contrast. I'm going to bring the brightness down a little bit. So you see there's the sky, but I'm going to add contrast to it. Yeah, that looks better. Here's the however, though. If I turn this on and off, it's actually affecting the lighthouse too, because let's alt click on that mask and look what it gave us. That's the mask. So anything that is light is getting this effect that we did to the background, and we don't want it. So how do we fix that? We've got to go into here. Let's zoom in. And if I want to see what I've got, I can command click on that and bring up that mask again. Yeah, that's a mess. So let's get this is the polygonal lasso tool because everything we're dealing with is straight lines here. So this is now part of the sky. I want to subtract it from the sky. So I hold down the Alt key and notice it'll turn the tools. See underneath the tool, it has a minus on it now. So I'm going to click on the side of the lighthouse, come down to there, and I'm just going to go right through the building. And oh, there's a stuff over here. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it did such a terrible job at selecting that out. And up into here, right to the edge of the lighthouse there. And now we can come up to there. Except now I'm going to have to add to this, but I'll just double click on that. Okay, we got most of it. Now I have to subtract this little bit from there to there. And technically these, but I can get those separately. Okay, the rest of this, it picked up some of the sky too. So let's get, or it didn't pick up some of the sky. Let's get rid of that. Oops, wrong key. I had to add to that, not subtract. So if you have to add, you hold down the shift key. Okay. All right. So that's what I really want for my sky. So what I need to do is click on the mask. And I'm going to hit, oh, I've got white in the foreground, which is what I want because I want to make that be where it's going to actually, no, actually, you know what? I'm going to hit X. I'm going to put black in the sky for a second. Bear with me. Here's why. So I've got almost the whole thing black. That's what actually kind of cool. But what I want, I'm just going to fill the whole thing with black. There we go. Okay. Now, what I should have done before I went away is selected that. That was my mistake. All right. Before you do anything when you're doing these selections by yourself, save them. Go up to select, save selection. Yeah, I can save selection. Sorry. Call it sky. Now I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to fill that mask with black. I'm going to bring my selection back. So now I click on load selection and there's, oh, I had done this earlier. Do sky. And then I'll fill that with white. So X and then Alt fill. Okay, so now the background's being affected, but not. So now let's look at the mask and see how good it is. And even though we added into this, there's still some screwiness going on. So we have to actually edit on the mask. So I'm going to, for some reason, something weird went on here. I'm going to fill that with black. All right. Now you can do a levels adjustment right on the mask. So if I hit Command L, Control L on Windows machine, here is the histogram for the mask. So I want everything that's almost white to be white. So I'm just going to drag that over. I want anything that's black to be black. And look what we have. Now we have pure white in the sky, pure black in the foreground. Now when we do our turning on and off, look how much better that is. And the other cool thing is now we can reuse this. So if I want to bring up the foreground, so let's do a levels adjustment. And I'm just going to look at the foreground. Do I want it lighter or, yeah, maybe a little bit lighter. I'm going to bring the whites down. And I think about like that. That looks good. But I don't want it to affect the sky. So I take our sky mask, hold down Alt and drag it in. Now it's doing just the opposite. I just lightened the sky that I just darkened. Click on the mask and hit Command or Control I, which will invert it. And look what just happened. So now what we just did was reverse that mask and look at the difference. Look at how much pop the foreground has. I honestly don't think there's anything else I need to do to this image because we went with those two masks, we went from there to there. And look how much more pop that has. So if I want to send this out to a lab, I can check image size. That will show me how many. That will show me my pixel count. And this file's not that big, 4560. Again, if I'm going to have a print done in this, 4560, I don't know, a conventional photo print maybe. So 150. Oop, wrong one. I did the wrong backslash. Yeah, easy for a 30-inch print. That would work just fine. That said, we don't have to be done with that. So we know we have a big enough for a 30-inch print. What could we do to make this bigger? If you're not familiar with the Neural filters in Photoshop, let's do that while we're here. I'm holding down the Alt key. I'm going to do another merge visible because I want to do it to this layer. And if you come up to Filter, Neural filters, Photoshop now has a scaling thing in its neural filters. It's called super zoom. It's right here. And if I say I want it to be 3 times the size, I just hit the plus thing twice. And it says it's going to take 1 minute to do this. It will take it from 4,500 pixels across to, I don't know, 13,000 pixels across. And it does a pretty darn good job of it. Yeah. So if you're dealing with a smaller file, maybe something off of your iPhone, maybe you have a lower megapixel count. Not all of us are shooting 50 and 60 megapixel cameras anymore, but maybe there is every once in a while there's something you want really big. Here, the super zoom in the neural filters in Photoshop will allow you to do this for your prints. And yeah, it's 50%, so it'll take a minute. While that's cooking, any questions? No? No more questions, you guys? Wakey, yeah, wakey wakeys. So, all right, was that a lot? We pretty much covered soft proofing, creating files, both to send out to the printer and to export the file and send it out to a lab. Is there anything I missed or that you want me to go into that I did not? Just type it in the chat room. Let me know. Or if not, forever hold your peace. All right, so this is about done. Okay, so I hit OK. And there it is. Let's Command 0 to fit this thing into the screen. But now let's look at the pixel count under the image size. And we now have a 13,680 pixel image. And let's look at it at 100% and see how it's good, how good it is. Even at 50%, it's pretty darn good. At 100%, whoops, I just zoomed into something ridiculous. Let's see, 100%. You know, it's not terrible. What I would probably do when I'm doing this is I would do 300% and then print it at 50% of that. I didn't do any noise reduction on this. And you can see a little bit of noise, although it's not terrible. So, yeah, I see some noise on the roof, but guess what? If you don't have the NIC filters, you want them. Get the NIC collection and run it through Define. Define doesn't, yeah, there's lots of softwares that do denoising, and Lightroom does a great job of denoising. Define is just, you don't even have to think about it. You just bring up the image and working, and the problem is it shows it to you at like 300%, so it doesn't look as great, but let's just hit OK, and it will do its thing. And yeah, it has to do it to a 13,000 pixel image, so it'll take a minute, but yeah, it does a pretty good job. Ideally, what you should do if you want this stuff, if you think you have an image you're going to want to make bigger, do the denoise in Lightroom with your raw file before you send it anywhere else. Because if you wait till after, it makes it harder to get rid of the noise. But the denoise in Lightroom does a phenomenal job. Okay, we're still looking at it 100%. Let's look at it 50%, because that's probably where I'd be printing it at. Oh, I keep hitting that, sorry. 50. Okay, I want the hand. At 50%, that's pretty clean. In fact, that's perfect. It's beautiful. So if I wanted to see how big I could print this, so 13,680, basically 14,000 pixels. So 7,000 pixels across now I have to play with as far as printing. So if I do a 7,000 divided by 150, I now have enough playroom to really 46.6, 48-inch print. I could do that with no problem now with this file, and it would look stunning. So let's just jump back into Lightroom for a second. So these are the TIFF files. Let me go to the library, to all my photos, and let me get the original RAW file, which is, where the heck is it? "401, 402. Wow, here's the original file before the edit, by the way. That's the original. That's the RAW before we took it to there. Pretty cool. If you've never been here, this is Portland Head Light near Portland, Maine. Probably one of the most stunning settings for a lighthouse ever. But yeah, this is where I would do my, after I did the edit, I would go into the develop module. Let's get out of soft proofing under detail, the denoise here. So do your sharpening, hold down the Alt, drag the masking over to get rid of the sky, and then click on denoise here. And now it does an amazing job, particularly on something like the sky. In fact, let's go up to the sky so we can see. So look, you can see all the different noises in the sky here, the colored noise, and that quickly it's gone. It really does an amazing job. So you click on enhance and then you do your edits. If you know it's something you're going to want to make bigger, then send it into Lightroom and Photoshop for your edits. All right, let's finish up. All right, so we did this. We soft-proofed in both Lightroom and in Photoshop. Photoshop is more complicated, but a lot more flexible and powerful because you can then do your edits specifically on layers, I think, easier. It's personal preference, but try them both. So let's sum up. Again, going back to the first thing, if you do just one of these things, profile your monitor. Buy yourself a profiler. Get one of those little display 1, 2, 3s. They are great, and they will save you so much headaches. If you're printing or on your own printer or sending out to a lab, you will get so much better results if your monitor is calibrated. The Color Checker Passport will make your color editing much easier, particularly when you're dealing with a place that has color issues. We actually have another photography kitchen tomorrow. I will be doing for the rest of the month color and light editing. So I will be talking about the Color Checker again. I'm going to show you a couple of edits. I'm going to show you an edit in Lightroom. I'll do a bunch, but I'll just show you an edit in Lightroom. And then I will bring it into Photoshop and show you another way of editing that is for when you have an image that the color is just not right and you can't figure out what it needs. But the beautiful thing is when you go through these steps, when you have your monitor calibrated, when it looks right on the monitor, when you have your soft proof, you can be sure that that is if you follow the steps for the exporting or you're sending it out to your printer, you will get prints that look like your monitor consistently. And that makes printing a lot more fun. And it makes the excitement of getting a print back from the lab a lot more fun because you're not going to be disappointed if you did this stuff right. So if nothing else, no other questions, then I thank you for joining me. That was a lot of stuff in 2.25 hours. So don't expect you to remember it all at once, but the recording will help. But at least you understand the process. And while you may not remember every little thing to do on the journey, you know that there are what things to do. And I encourage you to review the parts that were important to you and get printing. Because really, when I look at the screen, this is what we do photography for. That's what we're after. This is what we want to see. That's stunning. I remember, you guys know that I'm not a morning person, and Diane and I were here in June one year, and I saw sunrise. We had to leave the hotel at 4 a.m. to get these shots, and God, it physically hurt me to do that. But oh my God, the payoff! What a stunningly beautiful place. So, and to have prints like this is the stuff that you'll make a print of, and you can hang this in your house, and you'll never get bored of walking past this. And that's one of the joys of what we do. We've got these moments that you just look at and you say, yeah, that's pretty amazing. So I thank you all for joining me. And I hope to see you again soon. In fact, I hope to see some of you tomorrow night on our photography kitchen, where we'll pick up with some more color editing stuff. If you have any questions after the fact, feel free to send me an email. Or even give me a call. If you don't want to hear from me, send me a text. You know that.